Hello everyone, and welcome to a new video. This is Wind Waker Unflooded, the 3D modeling fan art project where I am reimagining Hyrule in the world and art style of The Legend of Zelda, The Wind Waker, corresponding the islands to the Great Sea to the unseen mountains of Hyrule. And I'm so excited to be working on this again. It's always a pleasure to be back in the saddle, so to speak. It's been a couple of weeks. I always say that, it's been a couple of weeks. I feel like I've been pretty steady this fall about, dropping a video every couple of weeks, and sometimes it's more often than others, but, I've been trying to be steady, right? And it's, maybe it's not the most videos, that I've ever uploaded per week, but it is something that I hope it's consistent, because I don't know, I do feel aware that this is a marathon and not a sprint, right? This is a big project, and it's something that, it inspires me, but it takes time. And a big part of this project that I've learned, right, is that, it's not even just the man hours of doing the 3D modeling for this project, right? But it's the time, it's the energy that it takes to make the creative decisions. And I think that that's really the thing that's just, I really need to make sure that I always hold on to. And so, that's, I think, has been the big thing that I've been managing, is just making sure that every time I boot up this project, it's I can't just rush to complete something, right? It's I need to wait until I know what I want to do with a part of the map, right? And that can be a simple question, or it can be a hard question, right? Sometimes not knowing what I want to do with a part of the map, sometimes that's just a question of, is it a cliff or a valley or a plateau? Is there a new mountain? Sometimes that's the question. Sometimes the question is, well, is this a place where another landmark from another Zelda game could go? Sometimes it's a question of, do I want to put something new here, a new town, a new city? What do I do here, right? And all of those questions impact my process. But anyway, without further ado, in this video, we are working on the Elden region of the Wind Waker's version of Hyrule. This is a region that, I've put a little bit of time into, but it's definitely still has a lot left to develop, right? In previous videos, I'm sure you've seen my progress on Zora's Domain and Death Mountain and Stovepipe Isle, right, which is replicated from the Hyrule Historia concept art. In addition to that, I have a dam on Zora's River, etc. We have the starts of one of my collaborators is working on Labyrinth, which will be in this region as well. And so today, what I'm doing is I'm working on a couple of things. There's this spiral formation on the beach, which you may remember from Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. I am adding that to the map, as well as the northeast Lomei Labyrinth. In addition to that, working on some terrain around the mountaintop of the Starbelt Archipelago. And so that is today's assignment. And those are all, most of the work that I'm doing is terrain work. And that's something that is, it's always an interesting 3D puzzle, because, I don't know, you may find when watching this that a lot of the terrain is not that complicated, and I keep things pretty low poly. But the question is just, and I'm allowing this to kind of be an emergent decision, right? Where it's I'm not exactly sure how everything's going to fit together, right? And I may kind of as I'm modeling, I may be making some decisions about I want the path to kind of go this way, and I want it to kind of go this way, and then I want it to get wider there and tighter there. And for the top of the Starbelt Archipelago path, I wanted it to be, because we know in the sea chart that there's a watchtower there. So I'm okay, if we're leading up to this watchtower on a mountain, let's really make this a treacherous, windy, narrow path that would be very easy for a monster to swipe at Link and he falls right off the mountain. And so let's do that and have it be really windy and narrow at the top of the mountain. And so it just feels very treacherous near this watchtower, and dangerous, very dangerous. And then it kind of widens up at the base. And so just really leaning into that, because I feel I have a lot of relatively well-sized paths, but nothing in the map that's really narrow. And so I wanted to add that to the map, and that was kind of important. But yeah, I wasn't exactly sure how it winds, and that's just something I discover in the moment, right? It's just the shapes are very, very emergent to that degree. And to me, I think that adds to the naturalism, right? It's and because I want the terrain to feel natural, as if it's all growing from itself. And I think that's something that I'm happy with the map so far, right? Is that there's things that's there's things that I want to feel curated and manufactured and like well designed. There's definitely aspects that I want to feel that way. But there's also, it's like, this is a project that's like, I more want it to be about the natural inspiration that it has, right? And it's like, I don't know, like if I sat out from the beginning and designed every mountain to be the most interesting shape possible, that would be a different project, right? And it would probably be over-designed, right? If I went out at the start and did concept art for every mountain. I have a feeling that like there would also be things I wouldn't know about, right? There's 3D problems that I would have yet to have solved if I had gone about it that way. And I could have really done like a pre-production phase for this project where I went in with a really clear plan of how everything was going to look. But to me, I really enjoyed, for this project, the process of discovering it along the way, especially because it was going to take so long. And I just felt aware that, like, well, maybe the creative decision that I would have made during pre-production might not have been consistent with what inspired me while I was actually modeling that area, who knows, a year later or whatever, right? So, I don't know, to me, that's something I definitely feel aware about the creative process, is that, like, it your inspirations change, right? I feel this way as a musician. I'm a composer, and if you hear any music in the backgrounds of my videos, that's my music, of course. And I definitely feel aware that what inspires me, even week to week, day to day, changes, of course. And the way I would compose something one day to instill a certain emotion, that would be different the next day. And that doesn't mean it's better or worse. And I think as artists, often we have to challenge ourselves and kind of thwart the desire to redo things just because our opinions change, right? Because that's the thing, is you may wake up with a new revelation and go, oh, like if I wanted that to be a sad song, I could rewrite it to be even sadder today than I did yesterday. And, I suppose that's true. But also, like, you wrote it, and I think if you did a good job and wrote it honestly, then there's no reason to redo it. And there's time and a place, right? And there's a time and a place to say, actually, we need to redo this. But I also think it's, if you can trust yourself as an artist, if you're proud of what you make, then, I don't think it's worth wasting your time with the back and forth of constantly trying to, be a perfectionist about things. If you're proud of what you make, and you trust yourself, and you trust your instincts, then yeah, keep moving forward. To me, I think that there's a time and a place where you have to kind of recognize that reality, right, and not get stuck in just trying to redo things. And I've definitely dealt with that on this project, because there's parts of the map that I want to rework, and there's parts that I want to redo, and I've kind of been saving those for later, because it may be something that I'm like, well, are they good enough to be able to move on with, right? And maybe some of them are, maybe some of them need more work. But it's a give and a take, right? And that's just something where I feel aware that, like, I've learned a lot throughout this process, and already parts of this map for Wind Waker Unflooded I would do differently if I was doing them right now. Things that I modeled a year ago, 2 years ago. Of course, I'm a different artist. I have different interests. That's something that would just be different. And I would be a better 3D modeler, for instance. But it's also something where it's like, yeah, like I've grown, and I think it's just, I feel aware of that, and I don't feel a need to hide that necessarily all the time, unless there's something that does not work, unless there's something that just looks bad, right? And that's where you have to kind of like, be aware of that. If there's anything that detracts from a project, then yeah, maybe that needs a little bit of work. But if it works, then just because you could do it better doesn't mean it needs to be redone. And there's a time and a place to kind of like figure out what's right for a project and whether it needs that or not. But this is something that I've thought about, and it's just, you do have to be aware, because you can waste a lot of time retreading the same steps. And I want to be careful about that. That's more what I'm saying. That is more what I'm saying. Because yeah, there can be diminishing returns here. But let me talk a little bit about the maze and the process for doing that, because this is something that the layout of the maze, I wanted to pretty much be attentive to the layout of the maze from Breath of the Wild, of course, and try to pretty closely match it. And my process for that, I don't know if y'all could think of a better way to have done this, but essentially I laid out a grid on top of a image of the Lomei maze from Breath of the Wild, and the grid mostly matched up, and then I just extruded faces from that grid in order to match up in general with the walls of the maze. And that's pretty much the process. And just doing that until the maze is done. And there's things that just because the grid didn't quite match up, there's a couple of, designs of the maze where it's not exactly the same maze from Breath of the Wild. It's pretty close, but it's not an exact match. But to me, that was an interesting process because, like, I'm usually not doing that kind of, like, modeling off of a direct reference. And it was just an interesting challenge as well. And it was also, it's a grid, right? And that leads to interesting needs, right? It means that, because a lot of this project is not based on a grid. It's kind of, kind of free-form shapes that, like, and I think that's very freeing, right? That means that things can kind of, like, it allows for less precision, right? And you can kind of make decisions as you go, and things can change. And if you want to suddenly decide to place things at different heights or move things around, it's easy to kind of shift the shape of something and it not feel skewed because it's already skewed, because these are natural shapes for the most part. But for something like this maze, which depends on its right angles, right, that just has certain needs. And so it was interesting to kind of like approach that creative problem. And of course I use textures from the Tower of the Gods that I think look great and match the kind of like the ancient high-tech design that I think is necessary for a place like this, where you want it to feel ancient, but also, aware that there is maybe some kind of like, advanced tech sleeping within this maze. So that was kind of my goal for it. And it's always fun to kind of like replicate areas from other games and bring them into this map, because it's like they get their own identity, and it just, I don't know, like there's something that scratches an itch for me just within that process of seeing something from, another game brought into this world and going, like, let's make it cohesive. Let's Wind Wakerize it, right? That's always a fun thing. And it's just, I don't know, to me, it's just, I remember that feeling of being a kid and looking out at the lake of around Hyrule Castle and Wind Waker and just imagining that the world had more, right? And there wasn't much to see, but I could imagine that, man, if I could just get past that river, if there was a way to explore back there, maybe there would be more to find, right? Maybe there would be mazes out past the ocean. Maybe there would be a coastline. Maybe there would be mountains, right? Maybe I could explore Dragon Roost from below the ocean, right? All of these things that you could just imagine, right? All of these cities and towns that you could just imagine right out of sight, right? The ranches, the farms, right? And that's something I definitely want to do more of too, is just really emphasizing the farmland. And I know that's been a suggestion for a while. And that is definitely on my radar. I want to make sure I've said that too. I see all of your suggestions, and those are all very meaningful. So let me say that I'm always very appreciative of y'all's suggestions, and that directly motivates what I do on this project. But I do think I'm going to start wrapping up the video. Y'all are about to see me plug my Patreon, and I guess, just let me say that obviously, like, I don't like begging, but I don't update very often. It's been a busy fall, and I've taken other gigs. Of course, I'm a busy man. I have other work to do. But if you want to be able to see more updates and see me work more on this project, right? Of course, becoming a member on Patreon helps make possible the creation of all of my projects. And there's a lot of different things that I like working on. I have short films in progress, right? And scripts that I'm working on that I'm very passionate about. And becoming a Patreon member gives you access to behind-the-scenes scripts, rough cuts of my films, pieces of soundtracks that I'm composing that you get to hear first before anyone else. Sometimes a year before it ever releases on Spotify. So I want to say that. And like I said, I don't like sounding needy. But that is just a necessary plug, that if y'all want to help make all of my projects possible, supporting me on Patreon or donating through Ko-fi, those are direct ways that make possible the creation of all of my projects, right? And that is very meaningful, and I'm very appreciative of everyone who has supported along the way. So that's all I want to say about that. And I thank you all, just for everyone who's paid attention to this project. And I get comments all the time from, I see people that it's their first video and they're saying, hey, I just discovered this project. This is awesome. And I see comments from people that are saying, hey, I've been here since the beginning. And I recognize, like I said, I recognize a lot of y'all's commenter names And it's just cool to see how many people have followed this project for so long. And I thank y'all for keeping up with the project and continuing to comment your ideas. And I hope that you've seen progress where I've implemented those ideas. I really try to, when appropriate. Of course, there's times when, like if I've either already implemented an idea in some way, or if there's contradictory ideas, I can't do both. But I try really hard to, to listen to the community. And I really want y'all to feel heard. Because, yeah, this matters to me. And I want Wind Waker Unflooded to be the kind of project that so many Zelda fans can look at and feel like, of course, like it's my vision, right? It's the Joe Kendrick version of Wind Waker's Hyrule. But I also want it to be something where, like even given that it's my unique take, I do want like a lot of people to be able to feel like that they feel happy with the way it looks and feels that it's right in some way. I do want to achieve that to some degree, even though it is my unique perspective that's going into this. I'm the artist, and so that means that that like this map is made in accordance with my creative philosophies. Of course, like every artist has their own perspective, and I think that this map could be done 100 different ways, more than that even. I think there's so many ways to tackle a map of Hyrule, and that's why it looks different from game to game. And I appreciate that. I want to say that, like, I don't know, like I'm not frustrated by Nintendo making maps that are in some ways contradictory, that have differences. I love the creativity, and I love that message that, like, even when it breeds inconsistency, Nintendo, with their maps of Hyrule, would rather support creativity, right? It's not worth adhering to some ideal of this perfect translation from game to game to game to game with all of these things lining up. They're okay with compromising that if it means a better game or introducing something new, right? And maybe that's confusing, and maybe that's something that if you've kept up with the series, it's confusing. Like, where did this mountain range come from? It wasn't there before, etc. All of these things that, or I thought the Lost Woods were over here and now they're over here. Is there one Temple of Time? Is there several? All of these questions that can be confusing, right? That are sometimes hard questions to grapple with. Or Death Mountain. It went from being over there to over there. What's going on? The Gerudo Desert. How far north does it go? Etc. All of these questions are tough. And I appreciate the Nintendo stance, as evident through their game design, is what's more important is encouraging new creativity, encouraging whatever makes the most sense for this story, right? Let's lean into what inspires us to best tell whatever the newest experience is. And I appreciate that. And that's part of the message of the Wind Waker as well, right? Is being aware of tradition and being aware of how tradition can limit you, right? I think that's what's great about Link, right? He wears the green tunic. He respects that tradition. But then at the end of the game, they have to be able to let Hyrule, be washed away by the sea, right? There's ways in which a love of the old can hold them back. And so how do you balance that respect for what's come before with a drive to discover something new, right? How do you balance that? And I think the Zelda series as a whole, right? I think its game development is all about trying to strike that balance. And I think that that's a really interesting question. But I've rambled for long enough. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to a past version of myself to close out the video. See y'all later.
Now, if you're looking for other ways to support me, as always, you can support me as a creator by becoming a member on Patreon. There you'll get access to all kinds of exclusive behind-the-scenes content like in-progress outlines, scripts, storyboards, rough cuts, and even soundtracks for my newest films. By becoming a member, you'll also be thanked in the credits for any film I finish during your membership. You can also support me by streaming my music. I compose all of the scores for my own short films, and you can listen to those soundtracks on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you listen to music. Just look up Joe Kendrick. That's JoeKendrick. Y'all have a wonderful day, and without further ado, I'll let you go.